He had it all: the corner office, the multi-million-dollar apartment, and the beautiful young woman on his arm. Today was the day Mark Thompson would solidify his empire, impressing the mysterious new CEO who had just acquired his company. He smirked, adjusting his tie as he led his mistress into the executive boardroom, presenting her as his top protégé. The room was tense, waiting for the new billionaire boss to arrive. The door clicked open, and Mark's entire world didn't just crumble, it was detonated, because the woman who walked in, flanked by lawyers, wasn't just the new CEO. It was his wife. The 6 a.m. alarm was a digital chime, a gentle sound for a man who believed the world woke up for him. Mark Thompson, however, had been awake since 5:30, his mind already running calculations. Today was not just another Tuesday. Today was tea day. Takeover day. He swung his legs out of the king-sized bed, the Egyptian cotton sheets pooling around his waist. The air in the penthouse apartment was chilled to a precise 68 degrees. Across the vast bedroom, his wife, Sarah, was already up. But she wasn't dressed. She was in a faded Northwestern University sweatshirt and yoga pants, her honey blonde hair pulled back in a messy bun. She was staring at her tablet, brow furrowed. "Coffee," Mark grunted, not as a request. "Morning," Sarah murmured, not looking up. "The machine is on." Mark scoffed, padding barefoot across the cold marble floor to the master bath. He paused by the floor-to-ceiling window. Below them, 50 stories down, Chicago was a grid of blinking lights, the pre-dawn sky a deep, bruised purple over Lake Michigan. His city. "You seem stressed, Sarah," he called out, his voice echoing from the bathroom as he turned on the multi-jet shower. "Is it the fundraiser? The guest list for the senator?" "Don't worry about it. I'll have my assistant—" "It's not the fundraiser, Mark," she said, her voice quiet but tight. "It's the finances for the Jennings Foundation. There are discrepancies in the trust statements from Zurich." Mark rolled his eyes, hidden by the steam. The Jennings Foundation. Her little project. When Sarah's father, Robert Jennings, a minor tech mogul, had passed away 5 years ago, he'd left her a respectable inheritance. Mark had encouraged her to manage the charitable foundation. It kept her busy. It kept her out of his hair while he did the real work, climbing the ladder at Omnicorp Solutions, a global logistics behemoth. "Let the bankers handle it, honey," he said, stepping into the scalding water. "That's what we pay them for. You're too smart to be worrying about spreadsheets. Leave that to the nerds." He didn't hear her reply. 40 minutes later, Mark was a monument to corporate power. He stood before the mirror, adjusting the dimple in his charcoal grey Brioni tie. The suit was bespoke, the shirt cuffs held by platinum links. He was 45, but he looked 35. Hard angles, sharp blue eyes, and a full head of dark hair he knew his mistress loved to run her fingers through. He strode back into the living area. Sarah was still at the kitchen island, now with a laptop open. She looked pale. "Mark, we need to talk. I called Arthur Vance last night." Mark stopped, genuinely annoyed. Arthur Vance, his wife's consigliere, an old, dusty lawyer who had worked for her father. "Sarah, I absolutely do not have time for this. Today is the single most important day of my career. The new CIO is landing. Omnicorp had been bought out, a swift and shocking hostile takeover by a ghost entity, a private equity firm no one had heard of, SJ Ventures. For 3 weeks, the entire executive floor had been in a panic. Who was SJ? A Russian oligarch? A Silicon Valley wunderkind? Mark, however, wasn't worried. He was the VP of Global Sales. He was the rainmaker. He was the one who had made Omnicorp profitable enough to be a target. This new CEO wouldn't fire the golden goose. No, today was his audition for an even bigger role. COO, maybe. This is important, Mark. It's about our financial structures. Things are not what they seem. He finally looked at her, really looked at her. The tired eyes, the sweatshirt that had a faint stain on the cuff. This was the woman he came home to. He felt a sharp, sudden pang of, not guilt, but impatience. He thought of Chloe. Chloe Bennett, 26 years old, sharp, hungry, and currently waiting in the lobby of her apartment building, an apartment Mark paid for, looking like a supermodel. Sarah, he said, softening his voice, the way one does to a confused child. Whatever it is, it can wait until tonight. I promise. We'll open a bottle of that Pinot you like. He kissed the top of her head. Her hair smelled like nothing. Just shampoo. He grabbed his leather briefcase. I'll be late. Don't wait up. Mark, wait, she called, standing up. I need you to know. Whatever happens today, I got to go, honey. Love you, he said, the elevator doors already dinging open in their private foyer. As the door slid shut, he was already on his phone. Chloe, I'm 5 minutes out. Wear the red dress. No, not the burgundy. The stoplight, red. I want you to make an impression. He hung up, a genuine smile finally touching his lips. Today wasn't just about securing his future. It was about unveiling it. He'd been grooming Chloe for months, feeding her information, letting her assist on his biggest accounts. The old guard at Omnicorp saw her as a pretty distraction. Mark saw her as his new, upgraded partner. He'd even manufactured a position for her. Special liaison to the VP. It was perfect. Today he would introduce her to the new CEO as his indispensable protégé, the future of the company. She was smart, yes, but more importantly, she was a reflection of him, of his taste, his power, his virility. His black Mercedes S-Class slid to the curb outside her building in Streeterville. Chloe emerged, and Mark's breath hitched. The red dress was a masterpiece, clinging to every curve. Her black hair was a sleek curtain, her makeup flawless. She was pure, uncut ambition. She was perfect. Good morning, Mr. Thompson, she purred, sliding into the passenger seat, the scent of expensive perfume filling the car. Good morning, Miss Bennett, he replied, his hand immediately going to her knee, squeezing it hard. Are you ready to meet the new king? I am, she whispered, leaning in. But I think he's already right here. Mark laughed, a deep, satisfied sound. He pulled into traffic, heading toward the Omnicorp Tower. He felt invincible. He was an apex predator, and today was the hunt. He pitied the old executives wringing their hands in the boardroom. They had no idea how the game was played. But Mark Thompson, in his arrogance, had forgotten the first rule of the jungle. There is always a predator you don't see coming. The 88th floor boardroom at Omnicorp Tower was designed to intimidate. A 40-foot slab of polished obsidian served as the table, surrounded by 20 high-backed leather chairs. One entire wall was glass, offering a godlike view of Chicago. The mood inside, however, was less godlike and more sacrificial. Mark and Chloe were the last to arrive, a deliberate move. He wanted to make an entrance. Mark, hissed David Chen, the CFO, a man who looked like he hadn't slept in a month. You're cutting it close. SJ is expected at 9:00 a.m. sharp. Relax, David, Mark said, striding to his usual seat, 2 down from the head of the table. He pulled out the chair next to him for Chloe, a gesture that did not go unnoticed. Maria Gonzalez, the COO and a 20-year company veteran, raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. Chloe, this is a level 10 executive meeting. Is your presence required? Mark smiled, all teeth. Ms. Bennett is my new special liaison. She's been instrumental in the Q4 projections that SJ Ventures found so compelling. She's here at my request." Chloe sat, radiating a confidence that was 90% Mark's and 10% her own. She placed a sleek, red leather notebook on the black table, a perfect, jarring splash of colour. She was the mistress, yes, but she was also a very good student. She knew Mark was using her as a power play, and she was more than happy to be the pawn that captured the Queen's side. The room was filled with the nervous energy of the condemned. There were whispers. "I heard SJ is a 30-year-old tech billionaire from Austin." "No, my source says it's an old money family from Boston, the Jennings." "Jennings? I thought they were small-time, West Coast, not East. Whoever it is, they bought the company with cash. No leverage, just a wire transfer. Who does that?" Mark simply listened, a small smirk playing on his lips. He let them panic. He had already back-channeled his loyalty to the new regime via the transition lawyers. He'd sent a private memo, subtly throwing his colleagues under the bus while highlighting his own division's streamlined efficiency. He'd pointed out David Chen's overly cautious accounting and Maria Gonzalez's antiquated logistics models. He leaned over to Chloe, his voice a low rumble. "See that? Fear. That's the smell of mediocrity. We don't smell like that, do we?" "No, Mark," she whispered back, her leg brushing his under the table. "We smell like the future." He was just about to reply, to tell her about the bonus he'd already mentally spent on a new penthouse for her, when the heavy oak doors at the end of the boardroom swung open. The room fell silent, utterly, deathly silent. Two men in dark, severe suits entered first. They were lawyers, radiating an aura of billable hours that cost more than a small car. They fanned out, one on either side of the door. Then, the click of heels on the marble floor. Click, clack, click, clack. It was a slow, deliberate, powerful sound. It wasn't the frantic staccato of a secretary, nor the hesitant tap of an assistant. It was a rhythm that said, "I own the ground I walk on." Mark, like everyone else, stood up. He smoothed the front of his jacket, composing his first impression face. Respectful, keen, indispensable. A woman appeared in the doorway. Mark's brain, which had been running at 1,000 miles an hour, simply stopped. It was like a film projector snagging on a single frame. The frame was this: a woman. Her hair, no longer a messy honey blonde bun, was a sleek, sophisticated ash blonde bob that grazed her jawline. She wore a bespoke navy blue power suit that looked more armoured than tailored, a simple white silk shell underneath. No jewellery, save for a pair of severe diamond studs, and her wedding ring. Her face. It was Sarah's face, but all the softness was gone. The vague, distracted look was replaced by a gaze as sharp and cold as the view from the window. She wasn't pale. Her makeup was immaculate, professional. She looked formidable. Mark's mind scrambled, trying to make sense of the data. It's Sarah, but it's not. It's a mistake. She's here for the fundraiser. She walked into the wrong room. She's lost. He opened his mouth, a confused, pitying "hon" forming on his lips. But before he could speak, one of the lawyers stepped forward. "Ladies and gentlemen of the board, thank you for your time. Please be seated." They all sat, stiffly. Mark half fell into his chair, his eyes locked on his wife, who was walking, no, striding, to the head of the table. Chloe leaned in, her voice a tiny, confused whisper. "Mark? Isn't that—" Mark couldn't answer. His throat had closed. The blood was roaring in his ears, a sound like the ocean. The woman reached the head of the table. She placed a slim, silver laptop down and surveyed the room. Her gaze swept past David Chen, past Maria Gonzalez, past the other terrified VPs. Then her eyes landed on Mark. They paused for a single, excruciating second. There was no recognition, no anger, no betrayal. There was nothing. It was the look a CEO gives a piece of furniture. Then her eyes slid to Chloe, to the red dress, to the hand Chloe had protectively placed on Mark's arm. For a fraction of a second, the corner of the woman's mouth twitched. It wasn't a smile. It was the precursor to one. The lawyer spoke again. "It is my distinct honor to introduce you to the sole proprietor of SJ Ventures, the new chairwoman and chief executive officer of Omnicorp Solutions, Ms. Sarah Jennings." The name hit Mark like a physical blow. Jennings, her maiden name, SJ Ventures, Sarah Jennings. The room was filled with a stunned, shocked silence. David Chen's jaw was literally open. Maria Gonzalez looked like she'd been slapped. And Mark Thompson just stared. Sarah, Ms. Jennings, smiled, a bright, cold, reptilian smile. "Good morning, everyone," she said, her voice clear and strong, bearing no trace of the quiet murmur he'd heard just 3 hours ago. "I apologize for the abrupt nature of this transition. It was necessary. Now let's get to work. I've reviewed the Q4 projections and frankly, I am appalled." Her eyes found Mark's again, and this time they held. "Especially in our global sales division." The world in Mark Thompson's head had shrunk to a single, pulsing pinpoint of sound, the click of Sarah's heels. The air in the boardroom, once chilled to a perfect 68 degrees, now felt suffocating. He couldn't draw a proper breath. His Brioni suit, his $5,000 armor, felt like a wool-blend coffin. "Mark?" Chloe whispered again, her voice no longer purring. It was sharp, laced with the first needle prick of panic. "Mark, what is going on? That's your wife." "Shut up," Mark hissed, his voice cracking. He was staring at Sarah, but the woman at the head of the table was a stranger. This was not the woman who organized charity galas. This was not the woman who fretted over guest lists and gluten-free options. This was not the woman who wore yoga pants and asked his permission to move money. This woman, Ms. Jennings, was plugging her laptop into the mainframe. The massive screen at the end of the boardroom, usually dark, flickered to life. It didn't show a welcome message. It showed a complex, terrifyingly detailed spreadsheet. "Let's begin with the obvious," Sarah said, her voice cutting through the stunned silence. "Omnicorp is a bloated, inefficient relic. For 3 years it has been systematically mismanaged, over-leveraged, and in some cases, actively defrauded." She clicked a button. A new slide appeared, a line graph. A thick red line representing expenses was rocketing upwards, while a blue line, net revenue, was stagnating. "The numbers you've been reporting to the shareholders were fiction," she stated. "A very creative, very illegal fiction." David Chen, the CFO, finally found his voice. "Now see here, Ms. Jennings, our books are—" "Audited by Grant Thornton?" "Yes, I know," Sarah said, not even looking at him. "I also know that your primary auditor, Mr. Stephen Hadley, is your brother-in-law, a fact you failed to disclose." David went the color of old parchment. "And you, Ms. Gonzalez," Sarah continued, turning to the COO. "Your logistics department is still using a dispatch system from 2005. You've been outsourcing 30% of our domestic freight to a company, Loggy Fast Solutions, which, it turns out, is owned by your son, at a 40% markup from market rate." Maria Gonzalez recoiled, her face a mask of fury and shock. This was not a meeting. It was an execution. Sarah was dismantling them, piece by piece, with cold, brutal precision. She had the documents. She had the wire transfer records. She had the shell company ownership papers. She had everything. Mark sat frozen. This wasn't possible. The discrepancies she'd mentioned this morning, the Zurich statements. Arthur Vance. It wasn't a mistake. It was research. She hadn't been flustered. She'd been preparing. His mind flashed back, a rapid, horrific slideshow. Her, on her laptop late at night. He'd assumed it was Pinterest. Those long spa days. The charity luncheon in New York. The trip to see her sister in Seattle last month. He realized with a dawning, bowel-twisting horror that she hadn't been seeing her sister. Seattle was the home of Amazon and Microsoft. She had been meeting with logistics and software experts. She'd been building her case, and the money, the respectable inheritance from her father. Mark had always assumed it was a few million tied up in trusts, enough to fund her hobbies. He had been wrong. He had been so very wrong. Robert Jennings hadn't been a minor tech mogul. He had been a silent one. He'd been one of the original angel investors in a little search engine company in the late 90s. Mark had married one of the wealthiest women in the country, and he had treated her like a mildly incompetent intern. And now, Sarah said, her voice dropping, we come to the star of the company, the global sales division. The screen changed. It was a picture of Mark, smiling, at a golf tournament. Then a new slide, a list of expenses. Mr. Mark Thompson. It was the first time she had used his name. It sounded alien. You, Mr. Thompson, are a fascinating case. Your sales numbers are impressive. Almost too impressive. She clicked. Let's look at the Omega account, your biggest client. They accounted for 20% of all new revenue last quarter, but the Omega account doesn't seem to exist. The address is a P.O. box in the Cayman Islands, and the $10 million retainer they paid us last month, our new audit traces it back. She clicked again. A complicated flow chart appeared. The money had been routed from a bank in Zurich. Her bank. You've been cooking the books, she said, her voice a soft, dangerous whisper. You've been inflating your own sales numbers by moving my money into the company accounts, disguised as client payments, all to make yourself look like a rainmaker, all to justify. She clicked one last time. The screen filled with invoices. Invoices for a lease on an apartment in Streeterville. Receipts from Cartier for a Panther watch. Travel expenses for 2, first class to Paris, for a sales conference that never existed. And, finally, a corporate payroll entry, Sarah said, her voice dripping ice, for a Ms. Chloe Bennett, position, special liaison, salary, $250,000, approved by, she zoomed in on the signature, Mark Thompson. Chloe made a small, strangled sound. She was staring at the screen, her face ashen. She wasn't just the mistress. She was evidence. She was Exhibit A in his career-ending fraud. Mark, Chloe's voice was trembling. You told me that was a signing bonus. You told me the company approved it. Mark couldn't speak. He was vibrating. The predator had become the prey. The lion's den was, in fact, an abattoir, and he was the one on the hook. Sarah, Ms. Jennings, closed her laptop. The screen went black. She walked slowly from the head of the table, her heels echoing in the tomb-like silence. She stopped right behind Mark. He could smell her perfume. It wasn't the light, floral scent she used to wear. This was something dark, expensive, and smoky, like sandalwood and ash. She leaned down, her mouth close to his ear. The rest of the room, the other executives, faded away. It was just them. You thought I was stupid, she whispered, her voice so low only he could hear it. "You thought I was a hobby? You thought I was decor? You thought I was just the wife?" He shuddered, a full-body tremor. "You," she continued, her breath warm on his ear, "were a project, Mark. A project I was running to see how much incompetence and betrayal I could tolerate. Turns out my tolerance has a limit." She straightened up, addressing the room again, her voice back to its steel trap crispness. "David. Maria. You're fired. Your breach of fiduciary duty is profound. Security will escort you from the building. Your things will be mailed to you. If you contest this, I will file criminal charges. Am I clear?" David and Maria, utterly broken, just nodded. Security guards who had been waiting outside the door entered and flanked them. "The rest of you," Sarah said, "are on probation. You will report to my new COO, Mr. Arthur Vance, who will be here this afternoon." Arthur Vance, the old, dusty lawyer, her consigliere. Sarah walked back to the head of the table. She looked at Chloe, who looked like a terrified child in a very expensive, very red dress. "Miss Bennet," Sarah said, "your position here is redundant, as is your presence. Security?" One of the guards turned to Chloe. "Ma'am, please come with me." Chloe looked at Mark, her eyes wide with desperation, and, for the first time, pure, unadulterated hatred. "Mark, say something. Tell her." Mark looked at his wife, his CEO. Sarah just watched him, an eyebrow raised, a flicker of cruel amusement in her eyes. "Go on," the look said. "Defend her." Mark Thompson looked down at the obsidian table, at his own pathetic reflection. He said nothing. A small, broken sob escaped Chloe's lips. You bastard." She grabbed her red notebook and stumbled out of the room, the guard following closely. Now the room was empty, save for Mark and the remaining, terrified VPs. Mark was the last one left, the elephant in the room. He was shaking. "And you, Mr. Thompson," Sarah said, tapping her pen on the table, "you're not fired." Mark's head snapped up. A tiny, insane spark of hope flickered. "She still loves me. It's a test, a power play. She'll still—" "Oh no," Sarah said, as if reading his mind. "Firing you is too easy. Firing you is a gift. You don't get a gift, Mark." She smiled. It was the coldest, most terrifying thing he had ever seen. "You, Mark, get to stay. You will report to me. Your global sales division is dissolved. Your new title is, let's call it Special Projects Manager. Your first special project. You will be personally overseeing the full audit and liquidation of every fraudulent account you created. You will undo, piece by piece, every lie you ever told this company, and you will do it from the intern cubicle on the 12th floor." She leaned forward. "You will come here every day. You will park in the general lot, not the executive garage. You will get your own coffee. And you will watch me turn this company, my company, into something you could never have even dreamed of. And when you are done, when you have cleaned up every last bit of your filth, then I will fire you." She stood up. "Meeting adjourned. Welcome to the new Omnicorp." She turned and walked out of the room, her heels clicking, leaving Mark Thompson alone in the dark, silent boardroom, a living ghost in a $10,000 suit. The woman Mark Thompson knew as Sarah hadn't existed for 18 months. The real Sarah, Sarah Jennings, had died a little bit every day for 10 years. She had slowly, willingly, packed herself away in metaphorical boxes, labeling them Mom, Wife, Hostess, Patron. The box labeled Genius had been taped shut and shoved under the bed the day she married Mark. Robert Jennings, her father, hadn't been a minor mogul. He was a quiet legend in Silicon Valley. He'd been the algorithm architect behind 3 of the biggest IPOs of the 1990s. He taught Sarah to code before she could ride a bike. He taught her to read a balance sheet before she could drive. When she graduated from Stanford with a dual degree in computer science and economics, he'd made her his CIO. By 25, she was the shadow CEO of Jennings Capital, managing a portfolio so vast it was almost abstract. Then her father got sick. Pancreatic cancer. 6 months terminal. During that time, she met Mark Thompson. He was a dazzlingly ambitious sales director at a mid-level tech firm. He was handsome, charming, and seemed in awe of her. He was a respite from the grief and the crushing weight of the boardroom. When her father died, the grief was a tidal wave. Mark was a lifeboat. She married him. She wanted, for the first time, to be normal, to be taken care of. She had children. She stepped back from Jennings Capital, handing day-to-day management to her father's most trusted advisor, Arthur Vance, and a board in Zurich. She told Mark she was managing her father's charity. It was a lie she told to make him feel big. She had let him be the breadwinner with his Omnicorp salary, which, to her, was pocket change. She let him build his world, believing he was the king, while she was the true source of the kingdom's wealth. Their penthouse, her money. The S-Class, her money. His $5,000 suits, all purchased with the dividends from her portfolio. She had been content in her box. She loved her children. She'd convinced herself she loved the simplicity, the lack of pressure. The illusion shattered on a rainy Tuesday in March. Mark was in the shower. His phone, which was usually guarded like a state secret, buzzed on the nightstand. A text. From C. Bennett. Last night was, wow, you weren't kidding about the view from my new place. See you at the meeting. Red dress ready? Zoe. Sarah had stared at the text, her heart a cold, still stone in her chest. It wasn't just the affair. It was the words. My new place. She'd done what she was trained to do. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She gathered data. She logged into the private bank account she and Mark shared, the one he thought was their main account. She saw the $250,000 wire transfer to Chloe Bennett, coded as a signing bonus. She saw the lease payments for the Streeterville apartment, funneled through an executive discretionary fund. She realized with a cold, sinking dread that he wasn't just using his money. He was using company money, Omnicorp money. She spent the next 48 hours in a fugue state. She didn't sleep. She just worked. She pulled the public filings for Omnicorp. She cross-referenced them with Mark's travel. She discovered the Omega account. And with her background, it took her less than an hour to find the digital fingerprints. He wasn't just cheating on her. He was committing high-level wire fraud. And he was doing it badly. He was sloppy. But the final, fatal blow came when she traced the source of the Omega account's retainer. He hadn't just stolen from his company. He had, through a series of complex, idiotic shell company maneuvers, stolen from her. He had found a back door into one of her family's smaller trust funds, one she'd foolishly given him partial access to for emergencies. He'd been siphoning millions, not just for Chloe, for himself, to inflate his sales numbers, to make himself look like the king he pretended to be. He hadn't just broken her heart. He'd insulted her intelligence. That was the night Sarah, the wife, died. Sarah Jennings, CEO, was reborn. She flew to Zurich the next day. A spa retreat, she'd told him. She met with Arthur Vance and the board of Jennings Capital. I have a new acquisition target, she'd said, her voice devoid of emotion. "What is it, Miss Jennings?" Arthur had asked. "A software company? A new biotech?" "A mid-cap logistics firm. Omnicorp Solutions." Arthur had raised an eyebrow. "Omnicorp? They're a mess. Overvalued. Terrible leadership. Their sales numbers are fiction." "I know," Sarah said. "That's why they're vulnerable. The fiction is my husband's. He's been defrauding the company. His fraud makes them ripe for a hostile takeover. We will buy it. We will buy it all." "This isn't business, Sarah," Arthur said gently. "This is revenge." "You're wrong, Arthur," she'd replied, her gaze chilling. "Revenge is emotional. This is pest control. He's a cockroach in my house. I'm not just going to step on him. I'm going to buy the building, tent it, and fumigate." The plan was set in motion. SJ Ventures was born. It was an arm of Jennings Capital, designed to be a ghost. They began buying Omnicorp stock, first in trickles, then in floods, using Mark's own inflated, fraudulent reports to justify the high share price to other sellers. He was, in effect, helping her buy the rope he would hang from. For 18 months, Sarah lived a double life. By day she was flustered Sarah, planning fundraisers, managing the kids' schedules, and asking Mark permission to take a trip. By night she was CEO Jennings, on encrypted calls with Zurich and London, directing the hostile takeover, retaining forensic accountants, and planning the complete restructuring of a billion-dollar company. She cut her hair. She bought a new wardrobe, keeping it at a private office she'd leased downtown under Arthur's name. She'd begun to transform, to shed the skin of the woman Mark had dismissed. The discrepancies she'd mentioned this morning. That was the final piece, the confirmation that her money had been used for the Omega account. It was the go signal. She had felt a moment's hesitation that morning, a flash of the 10 years they'd had, the births of their children, the early days when he had looked at her with awe. "Mark," she'd said, "we need to talk." It was one last chance, one final opportunity for him to confess. I need you to know," she'd started, and he had cut her off. "Got to go, honey. Love you." He hadn't even looked at her. He'd kissed the top of her head and run off to his mistress. In that moment, any lingering doubt, any wisp of mercy, evaporated. She watched the elevator doors close. She stood in the silent penthouse for a full minute. Then she picked up her phone. "Arthur," she said, "it's done. Execute the final proxies, and have the car ready. The navy blue suit. Yes, it's tea day." Mark Thompson's new world was beige. After Sarah, Ms. Jennings, had swept from the 88th floor boardroom, Mark had remained in his chair for what felt like an eternity. The other VPs had scurried out, refusing to make eye contact, as if his failure were contagious. Finally, a security guard had re-entered. "Mr. Thompson, we've been instructed to escort you to your new workstation." The walk of shame was a masterpiece of humiliation. He, the former VP of Global Sales, was walked past the executive suites, past the bustling sales floor where his team used to practically salute him, and into the service elevator. They went down, 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 down. They emerged on the 12th floor, records and archiving. The 12th floor was a fluorescent-lit hell. The air smelled of stale coffee and dusty paper. There were no floor-to-ceiling windows, just small, square portholes that looked out onto a brick air shaft. His new office was a cubicle. Not even a full cubicle. A half-height, beige fabric rectangle, identical to the 20 others around it. On the desk was a 10-year-old Dell computer, a generic black telephone, and a single stapled document. The document read, "Project Clean Sweep. Manager, M. Thompson. His S-Class Mercedes?" Security had confiscated the keys. "It's a company-leased vehicle, Mr. Thompson. Your lease privileges have been revoked. His parking pass was deactivated. His corporate Amex declined. For the next week, Mark Thompson learned the true meaning of power. It wasn't about shouting or firing people. True power was control. Sarah, no, he had to stop thinking of her as Sarah. Ms. Jennings controlled his new reality. He was a pariah. The 12th floor workers, mostly older employees waiting for retirement, gave him a wide berth. They knew who he was. They knew what had happened. They treated him with a terrifying mixture of fear and pity. His job, as outlined in the memo, was exactly as she'd threatened. He had to personally catalogue every fraudulent file, every fake invoice, every padded expense report from the Omega account, and a dozen other clients he had invented. He was, in effect, building the legal case against himself. He was trapped. If he quit, she'd have him arrested. If he stayed, he was her prisoner. He tried to fight back. The first night, he'd taken a cab to the penthouse. His keycard didn't work. "Mr. Thompson," said the doorman, a man Mark had never bothered to learn the name of. "I'm sorry, sir. Ms. Jennings's instructions are clear. You are not to be admitted." "This is my home. My name is on the deed," Mark had roared. The doorman had looked at him sadly. "Actually, sir, it's not. The penthouse is owned by a holding company. Jennings Capital. We were instructed to remove your name from the resident list." She had thought of everything. She had been planning this for years. He'd gone to a hotel, the prestigious Langham. His personal Amex, the one he thought he paid for, was declined. He called the bank. "I'm sorry, Mr. Thompson," a polite voice had informed him. This card was an authorized user account under the primary cardholder, Sarah Jennings. Your user privileges have been revoked. He ended up at a Holiday Inn Express near the airport, using the last $300 from his debit card. Work was a daily degradation. At 10 a.m. every day, his phone would ring. It was her new executive assistant. The formidable Arthur Vance, it turned out, was the new COO. His old role was now filled by a sharp woman named Patricia. "Ms. Jennings requires the Project Clean Sweep update, Mr. Thompson." He would have to walk his files in person up to the 88th floor. The first time he'd tried to talk to her. "Sarah, please," he'd begged, standing in the doorway of her new office. It was redecorated. Gone was the old, dark wood, boys' club furniture. It was now minimalist, modern, with glass, steel, and a massive, abstract painting. "It's Miss Jennings," she'd said, not looking up from a report. "Is the file ready?" "Sarah, the kids." "What about the kids? You can't just take them." She'd finally looked up. Her eyes were not angry. They were just tired. "I'm not taking them, Mark. I'm protecting them. From you. From the example you've set. They're with my mother in Kenilworth. They're fine. You, on the other hand, are late with your report." "This is insane. You can't do this. I'm your husband." "You," she'd said, standing up, "are an employee who committed wire fraud. You are a liability I have graciously decided to manage in-house. Do not ever mistake this for a domestic dispute. This is a corporate restructuring. Now, put the file on the desk and return to the 12th floor. You're burning daylight." He'd thrown the file on her desk and stormed out. But as he waited for the elevator, he'd heard her voice, clear and strong, on a conference call. "Yes, Mr. Bezos, I agree. The drone delivery logistics are the key. We're forecasting a 200% increase in efficiency by Q3. Bezos." She was on a call with... Mark had felt sick. He had been playing checkers while she was playing 3D chess across the globe. The final twist of the knife came 2 weeks into his sentence. A new employee was assigned to the cubicle next to him. It was Chloe Bennett. She looked terrible. Her high-fashion wardrobe was gone, replaced by a cheap pantsuit from a department store. Her defiant fire was extinguished. She wouldn't look at him. "Chloe," he'd whispered, horrified. "Shut up, Mark," she'd hissed, her voice thick with venom. "What? What are you doing here?" "She offered me a deal," Chloe said, her eyes fixed on her new, ancient computer. "Miss Jennings. She found me. I was about to be evicted. She said she wouldn't sue me for my part in the signing bonus if I came to work here, in records, for minimum wage." "Why? Why would she?" Chloe had finally looked at him. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but dry and hard. "Because she wants you to have a colleague. She wants you to sit here, every day, next to the woman you destroyed your life for. She wants you to look at me, and she wants me to look at you, and she wants us both to know that she won." Chloe turned back to her screen. "Now leave me alone. I have to alphabetize invoices from 2010, and so do you." Mark stared at the beige wall of his cubicle. He was not just in a prison. He was in a specially designed exhibit at the zoo, and the zookeeper was his wife. The human mind can only absorb so much humiliation before it cracks. Mark Thompson, who had defined his entire existence by the reflection he saw in other people's eyes, admiration, envy, desire, was now invisible. Or worse, he was an object of pity and contempt. He was trapped. His days were a monotonous cycle of sifting through his own corruption. His nights were spent in a single-bed room at a motel by the highway, the stench of industrial bleach clinging to the sheets. He had sold his platinum cufflinks for cash. He was eating at vending machines. He watched, from the 12th floor, as Ms. Jennings transformed Omnicorp. Memos went out. The old guard was gone. New, bright, terrifyingly competent executives were brought in. Maria Gonzalez's antiquated logistics system was ripped out and replaced with a cutting-edge AI dispatch. The company, which had been bleeding cash, was suddenly thriving. The trade papers were calling her the Iron Lady of Logistics. A visionary. Mark, meanwhile, was cataloguing receipts for champagne he didn't even remember drinking. The greatest torment, however, remained Chloe. She sat 10 feet away, a living monument to his failure. They never spoke. The silence between them was thick and toxic, filled with everything he had promised and everything she had lost. He had looked at her one day, really looked at her, and felt nothing. The fire, the ambition, the stoplight red dress. It was all gone. She was just a tired, angry woman in a cheap suit, and he realized with a sickening lurch that he had never seen her at all. He had only seen a younger, more flattering mirror of himself. Now, the mirror was shattered. One rainy Thursday, 6 weeks after Tea Day, he finally broke. He was on his way to the 88th floor to deliver his weekly confession file. He'd been reduced to this: a delivery boy. He stepped into the executive elevator, and just as the doors were closing, a hand shot out. The doors opened. It was Sarah, Ms. Jennings. She stopped, seeing him. It was the first time they had been truly alone, in a confined space, since the boardroom. He was carrying a stack of beige folders. He smelled faintly of the motel's soap. She was in a sharp, cream-colored dress, holding a slim leather portfolio. She smelled, as always, of sandalwood and victory. She nodded at him curtly, "Mr. Thompson," and stepped in, pressing the P button for the private penthouse garage. The doors closed. The elevator began its smooth, silent ascent. The silence was deafening. He could hear her breathing. He could see his own reflection in the polished steel walls standing next to her. He looked ruined. And it was in that reflection that something in him snapped. "You're enjoying this, aren't you? he whispered, his voice hoarse. She didn't look at him. I'm enjoying a 30% increase in share value, yes. No, this, he spat, gesturing between them. Me, the 12th floor. Chloe, the motel. You'll love it. You love watching me crawl. She turned her head, her gaze slow and analytical. No, Mark, I don't. I'm disappointed. Disappointed? He let out a bark of laughter, a broken, ugly sound. You destroyed my life. You took my job, my home, my children. And you're disappointed? I'm disappointed, she said, her voice still calm, but with a new edge. That the man I married, the man I built a life with, the man I gave 2 children to, was this weak, this stupid. I am not stupid, he roared, his hands clenching on the folders. I built that sales division. I made that company. You didn't, she shot back, the ice finally cracking, revealing the fire beneath. You were a parasite, Mark. You were feeding off my money to make yourself look good. You were committing fraud so you could impress a 26-year-old girl with my inheritance. You didn't build anything. You were just a very expensive, very arrogant costume. The elevator chimed, passing the 80th floor. You think this is about Chloe? He sneered, falling back on his oldest, ugliest defense. You're just jealous. You couldn't stand that I wanted someone young, someone alive. Sarah stared at him. And then, the most terrifying thing of all happened. She laughed. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was a cold, pitying, devastating sound. Oh, Mark, you still don't get it, do you? You think this was about her? You think I bought a billion-dollar company and engineered the most complex corporate takedown of the decade because I was jealous? She stepped closer, her face inches from his. The steel was gone, replaced by a white-hot, righteous fury that he had never, ever seen. This was not about your affair, you pathetic cliché. This was about the fraud. This was about you stealing from me, from my father's legacy. This was about you insulting my intelligence, day after day, for 10 years. You treated me like the hired help. You dismissed me. You, with your one talent, lying, dared to look down on me. The elevator dinged. The doors opened to the 88th floor. You, she said, her voice dropping back to a lethal whisper, were a mistake. You were the one, single, idiotic mistake I made in my entire life. And I am simply correcting it. She stepped out of the elevator. By the way, Mr. Thompson, she called back, not bothering to turn around, your Project Clean Sweep is complete. I've cross-referenced your files with the full forensic audit. He stood, frozen in the elevator. What does that mean? It means your services, she said, are no longer required. She smiled, the same cold smile from the boardroom. You're fired. The elevator doors slid shut, sealing him inside, leaving him alone with his reflection. Fired. It should have been a relief. But he knew, as the car began its descent, what this meant. She didn't need him in the cubicle anymore. She had her confession. She had her case. She had him. When the elevator doors opened in the main lobby, 2 police officers were standing there, waiting for him. Mark Thompson, one of them said, stepping forward. Mark dropped the files. You're under arrest for wire fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. As they cuffed him, he looked up, past the lobby, all the way to the 88th floor. He couldn't see her, but he knew she was there, watching. The architect, the zookeeper, the CEO. The trial of Mark Thompson was not the sensational media circus he might have secretly craved. Sarah Jennings, with her characteristic brutal efficiency, ensured it wasn't. It was a quiet, federal proceeding. The evidence was not salacious texts or pictures of Chloe in a red dress. The evidence was spreadsheets, wire transfers, shell company charters. It was the Omega account files, meticulously organized by Mark himself from his 12th floor cubicle. It was a slaughter. He was charged with 3 counts of wire fraud and 1 count of embezzlement. His high-priced lawyer, paid for by the last-ditch sale of his one remaining asset, a vintage watch Sarah hadn't known about, tried to argue he was a pawn, that he was framed by a vengeful wife. The prosecution, and by proxy, Sarah's new corporate counsel, led by Arthur Vance, simply played the recording of Sarah's first boardroom meeting. The slide deck, the invoices for the Cartier watch, the lease. And then they put Chloe Bennett on the stand. Chloe, no longer in her records uniform, was composed. She testified that Mark had represented the $250,000 as a legitimate, board-approved signing bonus, that he had told her the apartment was a corporate lease for high-value clients. She was a victim, she claimed, of his lies. Whether it was true or not didn't matter. It was believable, and it sealed Mark's fate. He was found guilty on all counts. The judge looked at him with disdain. "Mr. Thompson, you were a man who had everything. A high-paying job, a beautiful family, and you squandered it, not out of need, but out of simple, unadulterated greed and arrogance. You stole from your partners, you stole from your wife, and you defrauded your own company. It is the judgment of this court that you be sentenced to 8 years in a federal minimum security correctional institution." 8 years? The gavel fell. Mark, in his ill-fitting, off-the-rack suit, simply crumpled. Sarah was not in the courtroom. She was, at that exact moment, ringing the opening bell at the New York Stock Exchange. Omnicorp Solutions, having been restructured, rebranded, and merged with a tech division from Jennings Capital, was relaunching. Its new stock ticker, SJV. The share price tripled in the first hour. She stood on the balcony, confetti raining down, flanked by a triumphant Arthur Vance and her new board. She was the new face of American logistics, a Silicon Valley mind with a Wall Street execution. A reporter shouted, "Ms. Jennings, your ex-husband was just sentenced. Any comment?" Sarah didn't flinch. She smiled brightly for the cameras. Omnicorp is, and always has been, focused on the future. We have zero tolerance for the unethical practices of the past. We are thrilled to be moving forward. She had, in the end, erased him. The final ledger was settled. Mark Thompson was a federal inmate. Chloe Bennett, having cooperated, was given a severance package and disappeared, likely to find another Mr. Thompson in another city. The old executives, David Chen and Maria Gonzalez, faced their own civil lawsuits and were forced to pay back millions, their careers over. And Sarah Jennings? She left the NYSE and flew home, not to the cold penthouse, but to the sprawling, warm estate in Kenilworth, where her children were staying with her mother. She arrived just as the sun was setting. She shed her CEO armor, the sharp suit and the diamond studs, and changed into a soft cashmere sweater. She went upstairs and found her 2 children, a boy of 8 and a girl of 6, building a fort out of pillows. "Mommy!" they screamed, running to her. She fell to her knees and gathered them in her arms, burying her face in their hair. She held them, breathing in the scent of them for a long, long time. This was the why. This was the asset she had been protecting. "I'm home," she whispered. "Did you win your meeting, Mummy?" her son asked. Sarah Jennings pulled back, a genuine, warm smile finally reaching her eyes, a smile Mark Thompson had not seen in years and would never see again. "Yes, sweetheart," she said, kissing his forehead. "Yes, I did. The company is safe now." She had cleaned her house, The pest was gone. The ledger was balanced, and for the first time in a decade, Sarah Jennings was finally, completely free. And that is how you settle a score. Mark Thompson thought he was the king, but he forgot he was married to the Empress. He built his little castle on her land, and she simply bulldozed it. This wasn't just revenge. This was a total corporate and personal reacquisition, a story of underestimation, of hidden power, and of the final, devastating receipt. What did you think of Sarah's ultimate move? Was firing him too easy? Or was the 12th floor cubicle, right next to his mistress, the most perfect, coldest served dish of all time? Let me know your favorite twist in the comments below. If you love stories where the underestimated underdog reclaims everything, do me a favor and hit that like button. It truly helps the channel. Share this video with anyone who needs a reminder of what happens when you mistake a lioness for a kitten. And most importantly, if you want more stories of drama, karma, and epic takedowns, make sure you subscribe and turn on all notifications. You won't want to miss the next one.